Okay, so we have done the divided kingdom, and in the north, we've talked about Jeroboam and Nadab. We talked about the second dynasty, Baasha uh, and his son Elah. And then we talked about the civil war and the nightmare that happened at the bottom of that little roller coaster on the top there. Zimri killed Elah. Omri killed Zimri after he was king for a week. People put Tibni in a position of power for 4 or 5 years after Zimri. There was this civil war between Tibni and Omri, but Omri came out on top, and then his son Ahab, who was terrible, reigned after him. And remember that we talked about how the Ahab story goes from 1 Kings 17 to 22, and it happens in 4 different movements. There's 4 main sections of the Ahab story. We're going to move back down to the south in Judah for this lesson. Everybody follows one dynasty on that bottom line, except for one little hiccup. And so Solomon, David had a son, Solomon. Solomon had a son, Rehoboam, and Rehoboam had a son, Abijam. I am in 1 Kings chapter 15, and this is just a short little section. We want to note Abijam and talk about him real quick. Notice that on the timeline here, I have Abijam and Abijah, and those 2 names are because in the King's account, he's called Abijam, and in the Chronicles account, he's called Abijah. And we're going to actually note that. This is not a tough one, but I like to know these things, so I'm going to write them down. So let's go to our Bible, and I will go to 1 Kings 15. Abijam reigns in Judah. Chapter 15 and verse 1. Now in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam began to reign in Judah. So we have a new king. I'm going to take Abijam and I'm going to turn his highlight color green because he's a king in Jerusalem. I want a yellow note tag because this is not about structure, so I don't want orange. So I've got a green highlight on Abijam because he is a king in Judah. And what I'm going to write in the margin of my Bible next to that is number 2, because he is the second king of the divided kingdom. I'm going to write the parallel section. In my Bible, it's like this. Number 2, comma, 2 Chronicles 13. My Bible does not have cross references, so I have to write that stuff down myself. And if I want to, you'll see here in just a second, if I want to talk about Abijam, we need to have both Kings and Chronicles to get a good picture of what we're talking about here. So I want to make sure to see that that's 2 Chronicles 13. Also up here next to the heading, I'll highlight it on the screen. You see where it says Abijam? Over in the margin of my Bible, since I'm doing this in the notes here, I'll just write it down here. I put also called Abijah. So I have a note that Abijam and Abijah are the same person. And I'm only going to write one thing about him. I'm sorry about these other notes that you can see right now. Let's go ahead and get rid of my study Bible, so that's not going to be in the way. There's only one thing that I want to note about Abijam here in this text, and that is, look at this. On our timeline, do you see how there's a negative sign, a minus, next to Abijah? It's because he is not a good king. And the way that I know that he's not a good king is because of chapter 15 and verse 3. And he walked in all the sins that his father did before him, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. Was not wholly true to the Lord his God. Red, underline. He is not a good guy. But here's the thing about Abijam. he wasn't always that way. So let's go over to 2 Chronicles chapter 13. And you will notice at the top that he's not Abijam with an M here. He is Abijah. And so in the Chronicles account, most of the time, the chapters are pretty even and pretty useful. So what I like to do in Chronicles, instead of dealing with it in the text, which you could very easily do here, you could just highlight Abijah there if you wanted, or you could highlight him right up here in your heading. Let's do it in the text. 2 Chronicles 13:1. In the 18th year of King Jeroboam, Abijah began to reign over Judah. I'm going to do the same thing next to Abijah. I'm going to write number 2 because he's the second king of Judah. I know that because it's green and also because it's Chronicles. We're only going to talk about the kings of Judah in Chronicles. I'm going to put comma, 1 Kings 15. Oops, I just wrote 1 Kings 15 in my Bible. It's 1 Kings 15 verses 1 through 8. 1 Kings 15, 1 through 8. And underneath that, I'm going to write also called Abijam. He has a different name over there. So watch this. Here's what we're going to talk about in this section in Chronicles. In verse 2, let's go to the new paragraph, the second part of verse 2. It says, "Now there was war between Abijah and Jeroboam." I'm going to make that orange because that is a section heading that's going to define basically this entire section. I know that when I see that orange section, the highlight there, what that's telling me is that's what chapter 13 is about. It's about this war between Abijah and Jeroboam. And so we're going to get a little bit of history. It's good history. I would read, if I were you, I would read 2 Chronicles 13, at least through verse 12, because you've got a history of everything that we've talked about up to this point. But look down at verse 18. 2 Chronicles 13, 18. It says, "Thus the men of Israel," that's the northern kingdom of Israel, "the men of Israel were subdued at that time, and the men of Judah prevailed because they relied on the Lord, the God of their fathers." This whole section is Abijah involved in this war with Jeroboam, and Abijah says, "You have left God, but we have stuck with God, and we're doing things in God's way." And so this is the summary statement there. And so I'm going to underline this in green. I think this is the whole thing. Yeah, the men of Judah, let's not do and. The men of Judah prevailed because they relied on the Lord. Let's do the whole part of it, the God of their fathers. The men of Judah prevailed because they relied on the Lord, the God of their fathers. Green, underline. That's a good thing. But remember that Abijah has a minus next to his name, and the king's account says, just really shortly, it says, "He walked in all the sins that his father did before him. His heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God." That's really sad because he does good here. But look down a little bit lower in verse 21. After the victory, it says, "But Abijah grew mighty." So maybe we should start in verse 20. "Jeroboam did not recover his power in the days of Abijah, and the Lord struck him down and he died, but Abijah grew mighty." Maybe it was his great time of need that he called on God and that they relied on God for salvation in their war with Jeroboam. But after they were victorious and after Jeroboam died, I'm doing quote marks here real quick because I don't know that you can hear the sarcasm in my voice when I do this, but the sarcasm is perhaps Abijah just decided that he didn't need God anymore. He grew mighty, and that's what led to ultimately the king's description of him, that he walked in all the sins that his fathers did before him, and his heart was not truly wholly true to the Lord his God. And so Abijah grew mighty is underlined in red because that's the window to where things go bad for him. Okay, in our next video, we're going to talk about Abijah's son Asa.